You're good to go. I got shared screen. Anything you want to jump to or starting right off of the bat? Chapter 9. So,
Chapter 9. Well, let's just read the introduction here and then we can get some discussion going. And we'll talk, really, what I want to focus on is what we've done. Just kind of the discussion that we had to start off is what do we do to remedy this personally ourselves? We've shared a lot of our own stories throughout this past year of experience we've had, surveys we've done, things we've seen. And so that's really kind of as we hit these chapter or section headings is that we can have some discussion of how do we remedy this, and we'll kind of hit on some of the stuff we've talked about. So uh, Jeff says this will not be your typical discussion on remedies that you may find in a law school textbook or legal treatise. The typical remedy for a boundary dispute, as found in the law and equity, include quiet title action, ejectment, and in some jurisdictions, a declaratory judgment. Other associated actions at law and equity could include trespass, reformation, slander of title, fraud, and various and sundry other actions a resourceful attorney may be able to muster. We discussed at some length earlier in this text many of the boundary settlement doctrines, including adverse possession, boundary by acquiescence, practical location, oral agreement, estoppel, and repose. In addition to all these remedies, many jurisdictions have also created by statute or otherwise processes whereby boundary disagreement may be settled. At least two states, Massachusetts and Hawaii, have land courts dedicated to the settlement of property ownership issues. Other states have created a system whereby a boundary commission can be impaneled to settle a boundary dispute case. Still, other jurisdictions allow for a special master to be appointed by the court to assist the court in resolving boundary problems and in what may be
gotcha.
somewhat universal application. Mediation is available for settling all kinds of controversies short of full-blown litigation. These are all viable remedies, and I'm sure there are others. However, the focus of this chapter is the pincushion corner, a malady that is not even recognized under the law or equity. That's not to say that the pincushion corner has gone unnoticed. The legal profession and landlords have taken notice of the pincushion corner. However, the legal profession doesn't see it as a problem needing a remedy under the law or in equity. It's seen as a surveyor-created problem based on the assumed fact that no two surveyors can ever agree on the location of a property corner. The landowner's remedy is to just not hire a surveyor. In some cases, there are already 3 monuments representing one corner. To hire a surveyor will certainly result in another monument being set. Since the pincushion is, by and large, a surveyor-created problem, the focus of this chapter is the remedies available to individual surveyors and the surveying profession as a whole. This is a problem we created. We should start the process of solving it before the rest of society decides that they don't need us anymore. And so,
Before you go on,
yeah,
Miss Harmony is on, and so that those couple of paragraphs fit perfectly for what Miss Harmony's dealing with.
absolutely, absolutely. So we'll recap some of the stuff that we talked about before we turned on the presentation here. But I'm currently in a boundary resolution process between myself and another surveyor and our homeowners. And I was meeting today with my client. We were talking about, what remedies are there? What do we do since two surveyors can't review on this? And we were talking about mediation. We're setting up a meeting next week for the other surveyor and myself and our two clients to come together. But when we look at this, this introduction of what can we do, my client brought up a question. Well, can I just hire a third surveyor? If I can get a third surveyor to agree with where you believe the boundary to be, then don't we have enough evidence? And I said, yeah, go hire a third surveyor, and my guess is you'll probably have a third location for that boundary line. And I'm talking through how we review things internally. So getting into some of this, the next section is actually reverse precision. But one of the things I wanted to hit on is the roundtable Tuesday that we have that Trent does. There are opportunities there, particularly for the smaller outfits, to present a problem and have some peer review where you might not have it, right? And so that is one way. Internally, at where I work, we have 11 licensed surveyors. So we can internally, if I don't feel good about a boundary, or even just as part of our natural review process, we review it internally to see, if someone else can have a different point of view in resolving it. So I thought that I'd throw that out there. What do you guys do if you're unsure about a boundary or have something that's difficult? What processes and resources do you guys use to come to a resolution?
That's a great segue and a great question. So similar to us, right? So my particular firm, I just hired another LS, so that takes us up to 10 LSs and a couple of LSIs. So we can bounce our ideas off of everyone in the office. But as we talked about many a times, there's so many mom and pops and smaller firms that only have one LS and have to make those sole decisions. And so a lot of the reason for the Roundtable Tuesday, but yeah, and if you didn't have a really good mentor or somebody that you can talk these conversations off of, you're having to make those sole decisions. So I don't know if anybody's willing to kind of chime in on that stuff, but the, that it's a great point. It's a great point. So it's
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I can
will.
second that. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe Matt and I work in similar
yeah,
environments, and
yeah, exactly.
I found this situation to be very frustrating in Northern California because in addition to the neighbors disagreeing or the surveyor, the neighbor surveyor disagreeing with my boundary resolution. We've got and I love this chapter because it's got this grand finale at the end, like this is the ultimate remedy, and it all seems so simple in black and white. But we're developing these situations where we're bound by the Subdivision Map Act, and there's only so far we can take these remedies without sort of creating a violation, and even a perceived violation by the reviewing agency could complicate matters. So, um, I've got a situation where the neighbor, I found a kind of what you guys were talking about earlier. It's a discrepancy in
Yeah.
between earlier maps. I consider it to be a surveyor created problem, which makes it even worse in my mind because I feel like, okay, well, this is a surveyor problem. Let's come up with a surveyor solution, right? But I got the neighbors. One neighbor hired me. I talked to the other neighbor. They were like, okay, we got this gap and let's just split the difference and it's an equitable solution and everybody's happy. And I cannot seem to figure out a way to get that on the record without violating somebody's surveyor sensibilities. It's a reviewing agency. And you know, I love this book just because it is full of solutions, and that those few paragraphs that we read really kind of summarized it extremely well. And if only it were that simple, right? Even I mean, like I said, even if you get the neighbors to agree on a solution and say, yeah, this is what we want to do, then how do you make that happen without a quiet title action or, a lot line adjustment process that is also subject to agency review, and it's going to end up costing them thousands and thousands of dollars. And like our friend there and from the southeast was saying earlier, you got property that is a few $1,000s, and you're coming up with a $10,000 solution, and it gets ridiculous. Now, last thing I wanted to say is I've got a friend who's an attorney and a surveyor, and he's been doing this for a while now, and he came to our one of our CLSA chapter meetings, and he had this great solution that because he's so frustrated with trying to help his clients through these situations and seeing how many thousands of dollars it's costing them every time, another page turns. that it's crazy making, and he's like he doesn't even want to practice law anymore. He just wants to go do something else because it's he's frustrated beyond his professional abilities, and I sympathize. But his solution was that we come up with sort of a mediation process and get it legislatively approved where uh, you get a surveyor, I get a surveyor. These are the two neighbors are disputing. They both get their own surveyor, and then the third surveyor comes in and kind of acts as the mediator between everyone's opinions, and that way it's actually I think that the third surveyor, the mediator surveyor, kind of oversees the whole thing and directs both parties to come up with their own evidence for an ultimate solution and try to keep these things out of court because the surveys cost enough, right? And are we really helping these people by going in and saying like Trent Williams's deal there is like, you know, uh, go tell the neighbor to get their own survey? Yeah, that's great advice. I say that all the time. And if their evidence is better than what I came up with, then let's look at it. But then you get somebody that just really wants to send them off to court. Hey, go to court. Don't take anything less than a full acquiescence of your all of your I just want what's always been mine, right? So I don't know. It really just takes an attitude of equitable solution and compromise, and nobody really is willing to do that with real estate. So I don't know. That's all I got.
Well, I appreciate it. I think you hit on a couple key things that I wanted to hit on tonight. So I'll recognize those. I think we'll talk about them a little bit more as we go through.
You're coming across almost robotish.
Um,
Maybe unmute or mute and maybe unmute again. See, or
make sure I've got. Is that better?
no, try maybe unplug your mic and plug it back in. But
How about that?
oh, that was good.
Okay. Just switch mics from the same mic to a different port mic. So
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Now you're good to go.
okay. So a couple of things that David hit on that I think was really great is the mediation. We'll talk a little bit about that and our role as surveyors as peacekeepers. The other thing that we have to keep in mind with that too, not just as peacekeepers and mediators, but up until a certain point with what we do, we have to remember that as professionally licensed individuals, our role is to protect the public and the public interest. And in that, the public interest may not necessarily be our client, right? And so we have to be really neutral in our evaluation of the evidence. And that's very hard to do sometimes when one, they're paying the bill. Two, it's just human nature to want to lean one way or the other. It takes a specific effort to be neutral. And the other thing that David hit on that I think is most critical that is one I've talked about it here before is I love this motto: I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And I often say hire another surveyor. Let's see what their opinion is and see if we can't come up to a solution. And the hope is that we can work together, surveyor to surveyor and neighbor to neighbor. But they might find something that I missed, and we really have to be humble enough to be able to jump in and if someone presents new evidence, say, "Oh, that changes it." And as bad as that might be, we have to be able to gather in all that evidence.
I was going to say, I think John Stahl needs to write chapter 10, which is all about mediation at the very end.
Absolutely. And John,
He's
you
got his hand up. Yeah.
so go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try not to recite a whole chapter, but one thing that I did in my career that has completely changed my perspective on things was to take mediation training.
Mhm.
Every state has a mediation program. They all have mediation laws, rules, regulations. Everything's passed. You all have statutes. Go in and read your state statute on what mediation requires, and anybody can be a mediator. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it. It was here they had a 40-hour program and a 50-hour program. 50 hours if you want to be trained for family mediation, but the 40 hours is just mediation in general. And it can be any kind of dispute between any kind of combination of people. You can be neighbor, neighbor, it could be surveyor, surveyor, sure, but it can be employer, employee. It can be employee, employee problems. Can be any kind of, it could be you and your wife. It can be any kind of a problem. Having and understanding the tools that you can gain through mediation training are tools you take with you for a lifetime. And there's just another set of tools you can have in your belt. And it basically teaches you how to listen, how to understand, hear people out, how to acknowledge them and their approach or their perspective on things, and how to then communicate and keep two people who you're trying to get this agreement between engaged with each other and not getting so ticked off that they turn around and leave and the only resolution is left is a lawsuit. It's a matter of keeping people at the table and just being engaged. And I tell you, it is one of the things that I have probably the hardest um, uh, position to put myself in, because frankly, I really don't care. All I'm after is solving this problem so I can finish my survey and roll on with it. Yeah, I want to see this solution and I want to see resolution, but I think we as surveyors in general, and I've been all over the country, and we're all the same kind of people. And the last thing I want to do is have to deal with my client, deal with an upset neighbor. It's like, no, leave me alone. This is my job. It's my job to come up with the answer, and it's my job to tell you where your boundary is and then send you a bill. And so, from that perspective, it's very difficult to come forward and say, yeah, okay, let's get together and talk about this. What can I do to help? What can I do to facilitate? Can we meet? Can I talk to you? You can tell me what your concerns are, and can I go talk to the neighbor and relay those concerns? And how do I do that in a decent setting, between two people or between a neighborhood of people? Sometimes I've done those as well, where yeah, you just get everybody in the neighborhood and you send them an invitation and you put on a pot of coffee and a bunch of donuts and you say, let's sit down in this room and we'll talk about the problems and solutions that people want to offer, and come away with a neighborhood agreement, do a complete replat if that's necessary. There's so many different ways that you can approach mediation and approach these solutions, and it's the effort is so much worthwhile, but I couldn't do it without the training that I got. And that 40 hours was probably the most uncomfortable, mamby-pamby, touchy-feely, garbledy-gook, dealing with people and their emotions and all that crap that comes out of a dispute. And it's the last thing you want to have to deal with. But when I look at it from my perspective, it's like, okay, I can endure this because I'm after that end solution. And I can use those as tools that help me to get to that end point. Yeah, I've got 8 hours of a mediation course that I do, and I've got a 4-hour course that I do just on mediation and sharing how you can come up with these possible solutions to things. But I encourage you to go ahead and get the training. It's available. It's not cheap. It'll take you sometimes they're evening courses, but most of the time of them are, yeah, you take a week off and you just lock yourself in a room with a bunch of people you don't know, and you just go through it.
Yeah.
There's one thing that David had commented about with his attorney friend, getting so frustrated with it. I don't think we have to invent new mediation programs to be successful in doing it. All we have to do is just do it. And the laws are in place. And if you mediate a solution on a boundary problem, it's a constitutional right of contract between parties. They have the right to settle a dispute between them, and the courts will uphold those agreements, those disputes, any day of the week. And so all you really need to do is spend the time, document it in the form of a mediation. Some places you have to have an attorney actually draft the final document that gets recorded, but it's just recording a settlement agreement between two neighbors. And I don't think California can even pass a law that prevents that, because it's a constitutional right of the parties. And essentially you just file in an affidavit that says, yeah, we got this issue. Here's what we're doing to resolve it, and it's done. It should be a straightforward solution, and a settlement agreement between two parties is always encouraged and upheld by the courts.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even in Nevada, we've had some issues where they've agreed upon a line and just it's been adjudicated, and basically a survey exhibit, it circumvents boundary line agreements and boundary line adjustments and those kind of things. They just have to basically force file it. I did look up Nevada, so there's the bar has one, like UNLV has one, UNR has one, like all of these have like 5-day, 40-hour courses through different universities. And then David Bush threw in there, he's got one through the county called Critical Conversations Training. Sounds a lot like similar to what you're talking about with mediation too, but crazy. Now you have to trim your 4-hour down to 90 minutes so we can do it on Mentoring Mondays, John.
Okay. Well, I've got a short answer one too. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. All right.
Hey, well, Matthew, you're about to jump in there too. Anything else you would add to that conversation, or anything else you had?
Wow, thank you, John and David, for that. And TW talking about the humility. That's kind of where I was going to go with it.
Yeah.
But besides humility, I also think you got to be a little impartial. Sometimes it's hard to call another surveyor. It's easy if you're both surveying and you notice each other. I really like to call that surveyor and make sure our stuff is dovetailing before we publish. But if you disagree with the published survey, calling them is respectful, I think, to just make another survey that disagrees with them without calling them and discussing it. It's hard to do. None of us like to do that, but I think it's important. I think you need to call that other surveyor, have a discussion about why they did what they did and what you're thinking, and start there. And then I would say that the last thing is getting, and you've both said this, especially John, is just getting the neighbors together before it's a lawsuit, before they're gagged and don't want to talk to you, and before I'm gagged.
Yeah.
It's really nice to just, I did it today, walk the line with two neighbors, and we kind of went over all the issues, and by the end they're all shaking hands and happy, and I think that's the goal.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. I was gonna say, in Nevada, we have statute that we have to, if we disagree with the monument, we have to talk to the other surveyor, or at least attempt to. So
That's awesome.
yeah, exactly.
We
couple
have
things in
here
the
in
chat.
Utah. Here in Utah, we've worked directly with the division investigators, and if two surveyors disagree on the location of a boundary, the responsibility falls on the two surveyors first to try to work out the problem together. And so if a surveyor goes out and discovers a problem with another surveyor's survey and doesn't contact that surveyor, our investigators will hit them with $1,000 fine just
Oh,
for not calling the other surveyor and talking to them before they finish their survey. If you document your survey in conflict with another survey that's already in the record, that's $1,000 fine instantly, automatically. Whether it was you're right, wrong, doesn't matter. You didn't contact the other surveyor. You should have talked about it, and you didn't. So here's your $1,000 fine.
oh, that's cool. Mikey put in the chat, are you sure an affidavit would be legal in states that have subdivision laws? I will say Nevada, we have Parcel Map Act laws and anything else, and it circumvents any state law when it comes to subdivisions when it's a court decree, and
Mhm.
basically becomes a force file. So yeah, it does circumvent any of that when it's a court decree. So, but the court decree can be that, it's not $70,000 in attorney fees. It's, you
Mhm.
get a court case and you come to the court and you both agree on it and it becomes adjudicated and court decreed, and then they can take that and record it in the county recorder, and the assessor can not really do anything about it. They have to
Yeah.
they have to abide by it.
Yeah, that's one of the simple solutions. And when you've got two parties that do agree, and you've got some administrative
Exactly.
action or some administration that's against what you're trying to do. Yeah, you just get the two parties to go in as basically non-combatant parties, file a lawsuit against each other, which brings it into the jurisdiction of the court,
Yep.
and then offer the settlement agreement to the judge. Judge looks at the settlement agreement, says, "Yeah, it looks fine to me. You're in agreement. That's where your line is. There you go." And they
Yep.
file it as a final judgment. It's recorded in the recorder's documents in the title records, and that judgment will be upheld in any court of law.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
there's no administration review, nothing on it, because
Yep.
they can't. It's a contractual right between two parties, and
Yeah,
you got it backed up by a document.
we've had a couple cases that I've been associated with that are similar to that. Mikey, I saw you unmute. I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but
Yeah, thank you for recognizing me. It was more of a clarification that I didn't think that Mr. Stahl was talking. Is it hard to hear me? Sorry, can you guys hear me?
You're a little echoey.
yeah, we get
Oh,
some background noise of some sort. But
a loud coworker. Sorry about that. It was just more of I didn't realize that Mr. Stahl was talking about going all the way to a court case. Yeah, we've heard of doing those to get around a dumb planner, but they're still expensive and time consuming.
yeah, it can be, but
Well, and I'll add here in Utah, we're just 7 days from a new law going into effect or updates to the law for boundary line, what we call establishments now in Utah. Still getting used to that, where there's certain things now outlined where if there is discrepancy, ambiguities, certain criteria you can hit, then you can go in and do a boundary line establishment, used to be agreement, and kind of. There's a path now in Utah for that that establishes these unknown lines that circumvents to some of the regulatory issues that we face when we're trying to solve these issues. Let's see, Nick threw in the chat, everyone I've talked to in California gets hung up on the marketable title issue when it comes to boundary line agreements. I work in one county here in Oregon where the recorder will not allow a doc to be recorded that says boundary line agreement. I haven't tried the joint affidavit route there, but that's interesting. I'd be curious, is there anything in Oregon, Nick, in state code for boundary line agreements or even case law that it goes against the recorders are just not doing it?
yeah, he just threw in the chat. No statute on BLAs. Yeah.
They do BLAs in Oregon. I know Scott Freshwaters is doing boundary line agreements down in where is he at? He's in Oregon. I can't think of where he's at in there. Scott Freshwater. So he's heavily involved in the Surveyors Association there in Oregon.
In Bend, Nick says.
Bend, Oregon. Yeah, he's in Bend. Yeah, Bend, Oregon is where he's at. But he's been doing boundary line agreements, and we worked together on some stuff that he was working on. And the other thing I wanted to make sure too is I did a well, it was a 2-hour workshop presentation it was a statewide presentation on our new statute that we just passed. I'll try and find a link and get it posted for y'all. But it's a link to a 3-hour presentation that really, because what we're talking about, and the confusing thing is that a lot of you are talking about boundary line adjustment processes where you want to move a boundary line or change a boundary. And yeah, that involves a title transfer and conveyances and all sorts of review processes. And it's a real nightmare, real headache in some places. But boundary line agreements and boundary line establishment processes, that's when two landowners are resolving a problem between themselves that can be mediated, can be litigated, or however they can to resolve a problem, ambiguity, uncertainty, or dispute that they have over their boundary. That's a completely different process, and it's a constitutional issue, not rather than a title issue. They already know who owns the property on each side, so there's no question about who the owners are or anything. Question of title. They know they own up to their boundary. They just don't know where the boundary is. And so about this joint affidavit, this joint agreement between owners fixes the location of a boundary and resolves the ambiguity, uncertainty, or dispute. It does not adjust the boundary to a different location. It establishes it in the location that it's always been. They just didn't know where it was until they finally resolved all the ambiguity, uncertainty, dispute. Now they know where the boundary is. And that's boundary law, has nothing to do with title law, doesn't require a title transfer, doesn't require any of those things. And the title industry and even many in the survey industry have not come to a place where they've divided those two things. Are we talking about boundary, where the boundary is? See, that's surveyors do that. Or are we talking about who owns the property up to their boundary? That's title law, title questions. And we have to separate those two so that we can properly argue why we can do a boundary agreement or a joint affidavit, why two landowners have the constitutional right to settle a dispute between themselves, and why the courts will uphold that agreement. So that's basically what we're trying to do. And I'll try and get that link up here in a minute.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, John.
I'd like to add a little bit to what John said there, and this may be more of a problem in Arkansas than it is in other areas, and that is that the agreement or decree that you get from a judge is so tied to something that's on the ground that will be permanent, so that you won't wind up in litigation again in 5 years down the road. And that seems maybe out there on a limb, but it happens a lot in Arkansas. You get some attorney that's not very good at, or even a surveyor that's not really that well, or he's not going to be paid anymore for substantiating where the agreement line is at on the ground. And so you wind up with an agreement that can't be followed down the road. And and that happens sometimes with court decrees too. I've seen a court decree that a surveyor just have to shake his head and walk off from it because it's not surveyable. There's no way to put it on the ground after a certain time. And so I think it's our job to kind of be involved when this is going down and make sure that the descriptions and the agreement is something that can be carried forward permanently.
Okay, thank you, James. And I'll just add one more thing is sometimes the connection between the court and the recorder's office gets broken. So if we are involved in that, making sure that that does get recorded in the title record too. Sometimes those don't happen as cleanly as they should. Martina threw in the chat here a YouTube link. We talked about this last week. The Land Use Association of Utah, the boundary line adjustment or boundary line establishment, boundary line agreement establishment, and boundary line adjustment stuff that Utah's been working on. John did a presentation that went out to all the land rights, land use groups in Utah. So there's a great primer on what we're doing here, which is really great.
Yeah, I'll throw that on the post as well on the website. So
wonderful. And then TK threw in a link to some boundary issues in Oregon.
Yep. Yeah, I just found a couple of things in there, but
yeah. So there's some great resources there. Jumping back into the book a little bit to keep us moving along. The next section here is accuracy versus precision. And this is the one that I think we get lost in a lot. We rely on what we feel most comfortable with, which is our GPS equipment and CAD files. They give us this number that can go out to the tens of thousandths of a foot and give us these really tight measurements. And then we go out there on the ground and we find these fences that are off, even a foot or more. These old deeds that call to chains, and all of a sudden we start warping the way it was established versus the way we establish it today, right? And we've read this in the other books we've studied here at Wisdom Wednesdays, is when we're doing boundary retracement, we have to keep in mind of when that boundary was established, the means and methods, the accuracy and precision of those, and how they did their work. If they were measuring in chains, there is inherent error in that, and that error could be rather high. And if we're measuring with a total station, that's going out to 4 decimal places, and the return it gives us, those two languages really don't speak to each other. And so we have to back up and look at what are we measuring, how was it measured, and how are we retracing that. In a true retracement, you would be perhaps retracing it in the same method they laid it out, and I wouldn't suggest that now everyone's got to go have a chain and go truly retrace it. But methodically, we should have the same procedure, same thought process. Any thoughts or experiences with that from the group?
yeah, I think I feel like there's a whole session just on that with accuracy, precision versus, as you say, right? Like the original surveyors or even surveyors subdivisions that were done 40s, 50s, and 60s versus retracements in 90s, thousands, and tens, right? Like
Yep.
there's got to be, you got to understand the inherent error in between that. And so somehow I feel like we could have a whole couple-hour presentation or roundtable conversation on that. So
Absolutely. I'll throw one more question on that. We'll move to the
Yeah.
next section. Is how are we teaching our future surveyors, our crew people or LSITs to recognize the difference? Because perhaps as professionals we are, but those on the ground may not be making that connection. So how are we training them to understand that?
Well, and it goes back to the original thing, right? We're not walking the footsteps of the original surveyor anymore. We're just walking point to point to point to point search calcs. And so that's a big difference. And that's, those are conversations we got to have and training we got to have within our own internal staff. So
Yeah. And it's getting out there and walking that more often with our crews. I inherently trust the crews I have. They're really good at what they do. But I can go walk it and see things that they're not recognizing. And so if I walk it with them, and not say that I do a great job of that. I get busy enough that I don't do it near as much as I probably should. But But yeah, there's just a challenge to everyone. Get out there more and walk it with your crews, even if you think it's a simple one. It's a great mentoring time, but it's also a great training time to help them recognize what they should be looking at. Okay, jumping over to 9.03, regulatory remedies. And we've talked a little bit about this as well. We've talked about, the changes in Utah State Code that allows some boundary line establishments now. Starts off here, the one obvious remedy for the pincushion corner is to regulate it into oblivion. The most effective way to do this would be through the regulatory boards that currently license and police the land surveying profession. Here we would be dealing with land surveyors and engineers who should have at least a basic understanding of the problem. Attacking the problem at the legislative level would no doubt be substantially more difficult and risky. New language could be added to existing survey technical standards, or existing language in these standards could be modified to substantially curb the practice of setting new monuments when monuments already exist in the vicinity of property corners. So Matt, you raised your hand up there pretty quick. Go for it.
Hey, sorry, I was so late. I was trying to find my favorite quote in the whole book. It was in the accuracy and precision, and it was right up front. It's on the first page, 327. And I just want to read it real quick. This I highlighted, and I'm gonna get a tattoo of this. Geez.
Great.
Rendering an accurate survey of property means that the true and correct boundaries and corners are identified. This can be accomplished with or without precision. This can be accomplished without any measurement at all. I just throw that out there. He said this quite a few times at the conference too. You can do an accurate survey with a knotted rope and a Boy Scout compass. So
Absolutely. I think that's great. You remind me, we recently did, we've been doing a breakfast and learn and lunch and learn. We're doing 2 a month, one of each this year for our field guys and our office guys. And each month we've tackled the same topic. So in April, the topic was boundary surveys. And we just got done last week doing a discussion on boundary surveys for our lunch and learn with our office staff. And one of the questions that came up is what do you do, or how do the licensed surveyors here deal with or look at, you find a corner that's off, and let's just say it's off half a foot from your calculated location. How do you recommend showing that on a map? This came from one of our younger surveyors, and we had a great discussion about that. I think what you point out here hits the question, answers that question really well. So throw it out here to the group. You guys are doing a survey. You find a corner that's relatively in the location you think it is, about half a foot off your calculated. What do you do? How do you show that? How do you represent that?
okay, maybe since I dropped the grenade,
You
I'll
started
start.
it, Matt. Yeah, I'll make you go.
If it's one, I'd like to understand the pedigree. Why is that pipe there? What is that pipe? Talk to the owners, both sides. What do you think that is? Is there a pedigree behind it? Is there a survey I can look at? Or is it, it's really steep around here, and we have a lot of people building these like railroad ties with pipes in them, steps up to their place. And is it something like that that's just left over? I'm trying to assess that. What is it? Was it meant to mark the property corner? But if I'm going to accept it, how I show that is I show the property line to that monument, and then we reference what the record was. Like, hey, it calculates different, and we're showing that, but we're holding this, and we show that we hold it. But that's how we show it's different than the calculation is in parentheses per a record document. We would show this other record document calculates it to be, whatever angle or distance, which is different than what we're finding. However, we believe this to be the accurate corner.
I like it. Anyone else do something different or similar even? David?
Maybe I've got several different ways that I'd handle this. You find a monument out there, and it's not exactly where you anticipated it would be. Well, it can still be the boundary from one of two or maybe several different reasons. One is that the landowners have made it their boundary. It follows. It's legitimate from the standpoint of adverse possession or estoppel or boundary line agreement or court decree or something other than uh, records indicate. It could be the correct corner by on the basis of record title if that monument or that location was mentioned in the conveyance and is at the proper location. And in that case, that monument, even though it doesn't match the bearing and distance, it is still a record monument. It's because that original monument takes precedence over the other elements in the deed. So I want to make that distinction there between a monument that is accepted because of the record as an original monument, or it's accepted by some other means other than record. Now, if it's accepted as a record monument, in other words, it was set in that location before the conveyance was made, then I'm going to show the bearing and distance to that monument because that is the record. The record isn't what's the bearing and distance that's on the deed. That doesn't take precedence. The record is the monument, and I will show the bearing and distance to the monument. Now, if that monument is not the original location, if it's not a record monument, then I may still recognize it as a boundary corner for the adjoining landowners. But I am going to signify that that is different from record and it's being accepted by reason of adverse possession or adverse uh, uh, boundary line agreement or whatever. I felt like that it is still the corner, even though that it doesn't match the record. Now, if I find that that is a pin that has not been recognized by the landowners, they have not occupied and used their land in reference to that monument, and there's nothing there that is in the record as an agreement, or there's no issues of estoppel that I can find right there, then I'm not going to recognize that monument. I'm going to set my own. I don't care if it's a half a foot away. And I'm going to then show on my plat that I'm holding record bearing and distance, or whatever record that I found. That might not be it might not be indicated in the conveyance either, but it is the sum total of all of the records that I could find, including junior senior deed rights could make it different than what is in the conveyance, but it is still the record. That's complicated. I don't know whether I got that.
It is complicated. And Nick threw in the chat here the first surveyor principle, and we talked about this. And I agree with you, Nick. He says, I struggle with this one. If the landowner pays good money for a retracement survey that set the monument, I'm finding that corner. I'm going to be hard pressed to reject it, regardless if it's called for in the deed. So many of our subdivision corners were remonumented in the 50s, and they are clearly not original. That's a tough balance of evidence, and so I might disagree a little bit with what James was explaining there. You know, if it's off half a foot, we look at the precision of measurement. I'm hard pressed to reject a found monument over setting one. You know, particularly when it's that close. But David, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Which is the same situation that I'm in right now, looking at a map for the county where I have a surveyor that is rejecting an original monument, calling it off by 8/10 compared to record. And he's gone ahead and he's set a pincushion. And so we're trying to decide what we're going to do with that here at the county. And the rest of his information, he's found other original corners. And he did say on this one, he said, well, it appears it's been affected by a landslide. Now we have plenty of slides here in California. I've got to do some more research on what do we do, what's been done with when land moves in California. I'm sure there's a white paper or some kind of other reference information on slides, especially in California, that I haven't found yet. But this is where we're at right now, and we're looking at putting a nasty note on his map that says, "Hey, you found other pipes that are original, and they fit together, and you really ought to be just calling this off instead of setting your own pipe less than a foot away from this one." And there are no. This is out in the brush. This isn't on the flat. This isn't on about a wall. This is down in the bushes, down the slope from where he's at. And so, yeah, we're looking at putting a note on his map that says, "Hey, alternate location may be found for the reestablishment of this lot."
What what evidence is there present there to show that this monument that was found is in the original location? What evidence is there?
It's the correct engineer. The monument that was set is the same one as called out by the tract map that originally established it.
What evidence is there that it's in the location it was originally set in?
He's found 3 other pipes that are original, and they all fit together, fit online. If you produce 2 of his monuments, you're going to, up to this third one that he's calling out, then you're going to hit that within about, I haven't done the calculation yet, but I think you're going to be looking at being out by just about 1/10 instead of 8/10 for what he's doing. So he's got some issues.
Are you saying that the other original monuments fit for location, distance, and bearing to
Yes.
this one monument that he's saying is off?
Yes.
In other words, all of the monuments that he found fit the geometry indicated in the original plat.
Yes.
Man, I don't know what that guy's doing.
I don't know. We've gone around and around with this for a while, and this has been, and it's time to make a decision on it and get this thing done, because the iron's been in the ground for 5 years now. So
Yeah,
does he show on his survey that the distance on his plat to that monument is different than what's on the record?
yes, he's
yeah.
long by 8/10.
And John Stahl threw in there are the landowners.
Well, then how can he make that measurement how can he have a long measurement there if the measurements between the originals are correct.
Yeah.
His measurement's bad. That's what you're
Landslide.
saying.
It's the
Yeah,
landslide.
landslide.
It's a landslide.
Landslide. Yeah. And
An 8/10 landslide.
I am not a geologist. I am not a professional in slides. And so there must be more reference material on dealing with corners in slides in California that I'll be looking for. I'm sure this is not the first time. This is not the first time I've probably ran into it, and I know it won't be the last time. So
that confuses me even more when you talk about slides, because if there was a slide and this one monument moved, and then it would no longer be no longer fit the geometry with the other original pins.
right.
So a slide has got to be out of the question.
I agree.
Yeah, let's get moving. We could debate this one all over, and I
was just going to say.
Yeah.
So I will throw out here.
We do see this, yeah.
That I have experienced that with a section corner in northern Utah that definitely had slid. It was a stone in a mound of stones on the side of a mountain. That was all just broken rock. It clearly shifted about 50 feet, but there's known movement, and that's a lot larger discussion than what we're talking about here. So that is interesting, and it gets back to my original point in the discussion about accuracy and precision. What's good enough to say we're close enough, right? And part of that will depend on occupation, reliance, improvements to it. It's all that evidence we have to gather, right, and weigh all of that. So it's tough to sit in Monday morning quarterback that sometimes without, from our standpoint, obviously Dave is more familiar with it, is the reviewing authority there, but in a forum like this, it's easy to come up with a whole bunch of what ifs without, being there and seeing it and understanding all of that. But it's what we deal with, right? Those are the balances we have to take when we look at it. I'll just add in here to kind of finish out this discussion is when I find a corner, my idea is that map is not for another surveyor. That map is for the landowner and future landowners that may rely upon that. So if I can get a landowner to walk to that corner that I believe to be the true corner, and the measurements are there that they can understand that, I've done my job, right? It was thrown in the chat here. Mikey, let's see, Nick threw it in there. As John likes to say, you can find all the corners with your metal detector and only then get your measurement equipment out of the truck. You've already determined the boundaries before the total station comes out. He says, of course, this is not all the case, but I tend to quite often in my practice. And I agree. If a landowner that doesn't have equipment can go walk and find all those corners, you've done your job. And so that's important to note. I don't love these measurements on a corner that have these offset dimensions, 0.25 feet this way and 0.3 feet this way. The corner is the corner, and the deed is the deed. But if you can get a landowner to it with that map, there's not much that needs to change in what you're doing and what you're showing off of the deed. Found and accepted, John says.
Yeah.
Well, to my mind, some of this stuff about speed cushions is looking for a problem where there's not really one. I know if I come out on a survey and there's already 2 or 3 pins there, and the landowners start talking about surveyors can't agree on anything, I look at them and say, fellas, all that we've got is a professional opinion. And here you have got 3 guys that went through an unbelievably complex operation of records, monuments found, physical evidence, and measurements, and they all come down to this small little area there that you could place a coffee cup over their pins. And I'm going to say You know, if I do the same thing, I'm going to have an opinion and it won't match any of these guys, but it won't be very far off. So what I'm telling you is that all of these pens are good. Every single one of them. Pick one. One of them's as good as the other. And it's not worth arguing on. That the precision that your deed and the actions that you have taken over the years have so rendered it so that is the sum total of the precision that you can expect. Your boundary line is not a tiny wire size thing. It's 3 or 4 inches wide. So quit bothering each other. This is a neutral zone. When you play football, you get two lines line up with the ball, but there's got to be a space in between them. I don't know that the rules specify how much space that is, but it's called the neutral zone. And when landowners allow their boundaries to become so slightly obliterated that they can no longer be pinpointed to a tiny little position for a monument, they've got nobody to blame but themselves. They just got a boundary line that has a little more width to it than maybe what it started as. And there's no law in Arkansas or any place else that I know of that requires a conveyance to have a certain precision. That's between the grantor and the grantee and the landowners, one landowner to another landowner. And so I don't have any problem with discussing that pincushion. I'm definitely not going to put my pen out there, and it's just another opinion, and it's no better nor worse than what they already have there, and that's what I'm going to tell them. A part of our problem is that the general public does not understand land and boundaries. And that probably goes because they go all the way through school, through the 12th grade, and I doubt that any of them get even a hour or two of instruction about what land and boundaries are. And that's maybe our fault. How many of you have ever volunteered to go to school one day for one of the courses that's going on and educate these people? But I don't know how it is in your area, but in my area, every one of those kids, there's probably 75 or 80% of the kids that go to high school are going to own land at some point in their life, and they have absolutely no idea about what boundaries are.
Not to go down a rabbit hole, but that's two conversations. One, I do have that conversation when I do high school presentations. But the flip side is when we go back to NSPS and we do our lobby day, we're talking to the staff members of Congress and senators, right? And a lot of them are, and we're talking about monument preservation and all these different things. But a lot of them, as staffers, all live in apartments and those kind of things, right? As urban city living, and so they don't necessarily understand the importance of monumentation and surveying. So it's a twofold conversation, and it always goes back to educating the client, educating the public, right? And so,
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's keep us moving. We're quickly running out of time and still have plenty to get through here on it. So, getting back into regulatory, the one thing that I wanted to add there is some states have some standard of care written in. Many states have, through their professional society, a standard of care. And so we've talked about this. We're preaching to the choir here, but getting involved, making sure you understand and have input in that so that standard of, so there is a standard of care that's shared and taught with everybody. That's probably the best way to regulate it. Anybody that served on a legislative committee for a state society or done anything, it's amazing how fast what could be a simple language change morphs into something very different than the original intent once you get, a few hundred, couple hundred legislatures in and wanting to have their 2 cents. Whether they have an interest in it or not, it morphs and distorts pretty quickly. And so pulling that back to holding each other accountable, within our state societies, perhaps our licensing boards, I hate to say it, but reporting, some states are really good at it and some are not, but making sure that we hold each other accountable and as professionals is the best way to regulate that.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
So from a licensing board, Arizona just went through a whole like sunset. I mean, it wasn't even a sunset; it was an attack. But one of the things that came out of that is you're no longer able to self-report. You need to be a harmed party in that complaint now. So surveyor to surveyor complaints can no longer happen in the state of Arizona. You must be a harmed party. So you'd have to have the landowner file the complaint or whatever, but no longer able to self-report in Arizona.
I'd be curious to hear that because self-report, I think if I've made a mistake, I'd self-report. So it's but
Yeah,
a hard party report. That's interesting.
yeah, exactly. Yep,
Oh, wow.
yep.
I've got one other thing I want to bring up, and that is I want to back out from the trees and get an overview of this pincushion type thing. And that is, I listen to a lot of surveyors in forums over the last month or two, and I get the impression that there's some feeling, and it was kind of mentioned here before, about the boundaries are there on the ground. You just need to go find them. And that is true from some standpoint, but if we say that the answer to every boundary is on the ground, that some monument or some occupation or something specifies where that ground is, every track has been surveyed, and you follow the footsteps of whatever that survey is, whether it was the original survey or only a first survey. If you follow that and you find the evidence on the ground, that is the boundary. As soon as we get to that point, if that's what we're doing, if all we're doing is setting a boundary on the basis of what we found on the ground, then you can take all those books by the authorities that we have often read and studied, and you throw them in the trash because they don't mean anything. If the record is never the boundary on the ground, then those records aren't worth anything. On the other hand, the record can't always be the boundary on the ground either, because there are a lot of other issues that go into making a boundary that aren't in the record. So one is not the answer over the other. You have to take both of them together to make up the boundary. And so, in people who don't like pincushions have a tendency to say the record no longer counts. They have established some criteria or some logic that leads him to the point that throw aside the record and go with what's on the ground. And as soon as we do that, we give up the situation about whether the corner was moved, whether by accident or by intent. And if we can't determine when a monument has been moved, then we aren't any good for the society. I don't see how we can charge what we charge if we can't can't make that distinction between a monument that was originally there and one who has been moved. I'm done.
Okay. Well, thanks, James. Appreciate that.
Mic drop.
Yep. Okay, jumping on to the next section here, so we can get wrapped up in the next few minutes. Is rewriting legal descriptions. The bottom of 334 it says the subject of rewriting legal descriptions comes up way too often in many inappropriate circumstances. It also comes up often in the context of the performing surveys under the ALTA standards. That in some parts of the country it is routine that the property description is to be rewritten to match the survey results, whether there's a real need to do so or not. The 2011 standards address the issue in section 6B with the following. Preparation of the new description should be avoided unless deemed necessary or appropriate by the surveyor and insurer. Preparation of a new description should also generally be avoided when the record description is a lot or block in a platted recorded subdivision. We've talked about that a little bit here. We see it on occasion in Utah, an as surveyed description, a changed description. Sometimes that's to clarify ties to section corners, and differences in there, but that's a sticky game, and it gets really sticky when we talk about record title, chain of title, keeping a clean title there to go throw changes in there that a landowner might rely on. Can muddy the water, and so going through proper procedures, and the last couple pages of the book talk about some of those procedures, and we've covered them. Things like a boundary line agreement, a boundary line adjustment to officially fix it instead of just rewriting a description and changing the chain of title is the best way in resolving this. And so if there's any question to the location of a monument, and let's have those discussions with our clients and fix it instead of either perpetuating the error or creating a pincushion. There are a lot of resources we have in order to correct and clean that up and hold something that's found, hold an occupation, or mediate between the two landowner parties and get something cleaned up in there. The difference for us as professionals is not just identifying the problem, but then helping our clients resolve the problems that we may find. And so that would be my plea as I've read through this and rediscussed this and think through my career. That's what sets us apart. John threw in the chat here, just Google the doctrine of reformation, rewriting descriptions. Just don't. So thank you. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, or insights about the book, Pincushion Effect?
A book that was written, like Jeff said, it was published 14 years ago, but written 15, 16 plus years ago. Definitely still stands today. Obviously, he wants to make a few changes, and so hopefully we have the second edition of that. But I think it stands the way he wrote it 14 plus years ago, 15 plus years ago. So I'd see Mr. Bob Dahl's unmuting himself. So
yeah, I want to say thank you to Trent Kay for all your efforts. It's been real helpful to a lot of people, and to Trent W. This had to be a hard thing to march it through, and to of course Jeffrey Lucas. He needs to be encouraged. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. So because you have your camera on, Mr. Dahl, how many books are behind you? Because that is quite the library.
My problem is I'm going to have to move and downsize.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody that wants a library?
Every state association's education foundation will definitely your donations for sure.
Yep, absolutely. Those are all the ones that go for big.
We have a really great conference in March of 2026, Mr. Dahl, and we can find ways to get those to that particular conference. That's going to be a good one. So
Let's
I think we're-
reword that. We'll find great ways to spend Trent's money.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's shut up. But there is I mean, we can find. We have. I think we're up to 6 or 7 states now for the Western States Conference in March of 26. I believe Alaska has signed the MOU, and I believe New Mexico is possibly going to sign the MOU as well. But so it's currently Nevada, Arizona, Utah, California, Wyoming. So that's 5, and then I believe it's Alaska, and we have a West Fed board meeting next week, so I can confirm. But Alaska and New Mexico should be joining. So it should be 7 states plus West Fed. So that is a massive conference and a massive auction. So Education Foundation auction. So that'd be amazing. But yeah, not that we want your books, Bob, because we don't want you going anywhere. But that was an impressive library.
Absolutely.
So good.
Now, this is a great book. This is a good book. I had this is one book I had never read before, as opposed to the other ones that I knew about. This was a new one for me. I had reservations going into it, and I'm glad that we've gone through the whole thing. It is a good one for me to hang on to. So
that is awesome. Yeah.
Good one.
After all of those years, I'm surprised. I mean, it was one of the. I have a book signed by Jeff because I bought one of the original ones in 2011. I took to Nevada. I took because I have Steve Parrish's stuff. He had signed a book for Parrish, and I took that to the auction. I don't remember who ended up with that, but it was pretty cool. So yeah, it was. I loved this book 15 years ago. So yeah, it's great stuff. What I know we haven't talked about it much, but the doctrine of Reformation, that's what John just threw in there. But thoughts or questions on what the next book is? I know you were trying to want to go something a little lighter, but maybe we do something lighter during the summer. But
yeah, I was thinking about that. I've just been too overwhelmed to think about it. I think I've got a couple. I think we can do one June, July, and August for an article. I've got a couple of articles saved that I think I'll throw over to you, TK.
Okay, cool.
Get a date thrown, and then
yeah.
I don't know about a book. I'm really thinking. I don't have my. There's my notes here.
We talked about how the states were formed. That was going to be a really cool one. That might be a really cool one just to do. But
yeah,
that would be cool.
It doesn't meet the goal of Wisdom Wednesday, to be honest. It would be a fun. Yeah, I've enjoying this, and I want to keep doing it. But at Bob's point, I don't know how you do as much as you do, because to do every other Wednesday is challenging, to say the least. So the thought right now is we're getting over a year to go do like Clark on surveying is just a little bit mind numbing. But I think over the summer I'll probably change my mind and be refreshed and ready to do it. But
right, yeah, we did this one. So 9 chapters. We did it in 15 weeks. So 8 months, 15 weeks. Not terrible. We finished a little earlier than we finished the other books for sure. We were grand into late May, early June on some of the other ones. So no, it's awesome. I love doing these things. So
so we'll think about it. We'll get some word out, and we'll plan something.
Yeah, so
weeks to get settled again.
Hopefully everybody. I know my email list is a little over 2,000 at the moment, so hopefully, and I'll keep posting stuff on social media or whatever, so we'll get some fillers out there. But
let's do
love
it
for
sure.
Good stuff.
Okay, well, thanks everybody again. I appreciate you guys. We've had probably had the most discussion in this book, which makes this so much easier for me to moderate, and so I appreciate that. The opinions and discussions here have been huge. So thank you. Share it, get it out to all our other surveyors, and maybe send the link to anyone you're disputing with too, and we'll get them in on the right page.
That's right. Love it. Awesome.
Okay, have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. Harmony, for sticking around all these times. We're going to find you somebody to help you, I promise. We're going to end it with that.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.